Myself Muqaddas Fatma and I am going to discuss about chemical waste disposal and first aid practices. First of all, we have to learn what is chemical waste, how many types are there and how to dispose of them and how to maintain a safe and clean working environment. Let's start. Chemical waste includes solid, liquid, or gases containing or contaminated with flammable solvents, leachate, toxic material, corrosive, reactive, toxic materials, polychlorinated biphenyls, and non-returnable gas cylinders. Flammable solvents includes acetone, alcohols, acetonitrile, leachate, toxic materials includes heavy metals, pesticides, corrosives, example HCl, potassium hydroxide pellets, reactives such as oxidizers, cyanides, sulfides, explosive, unstable materials, and water reactive materials. And toxic materials includes mutagenic, carcinogenic, acute or chronic toxicity materials, example CCl4, etherium bromide, and polychlorinated biphenyls that are of 750 ppm concentration. And then we will discuss the types of waste. There are five types of waste that includes non-hazardous liquid waste, solid waste, broken glassware and sharps. First is non-hazardous waste. It comprises anything that's not heavy contaminated with toxic chemicals such as paper towels, medical tissues, peptide tips, empty plastic containers such as drop tubes, etc. And the second type is liquid waste. These includes hazardous and non-hazardous liquid waste. Hazardous liquid waste includes oil, else organic solvent, toxic liquid chemicals, and in the non-hazardous liquid waste includes dilute acid or base. Their volume is 10 volume by volume percentage, and the second is buffer solution. First of all, we have to learn what is buffer solution. Buffer solution is an aqueous solution consisting of a mixture of weak acid and its conjugate base. It's used to keeping the pH at constant value in wide variety of applications. And the third type is solid waste. These includes solid chemicals, drying agents, silica gel, molecular sieves, pre-packed columns, filter materials, heavy contaminated paper towels and gloves, etc. And fourth is broken glassware, and this type of glassware that you need to dispose of. And the fifth is the sharps. It includes needles and similar contaminated items. And here is the flow sheet diagrams of sharps, and that includes needles and syringes. When it is contaminated with human bloods, it may be disposal of by disposal procedure. And the hazardous glass and plastics, and then the empty bottles and other glass and plastics that may be disposed of by the disposal procedure from which waste may be contaminated. Chemical waste can be classified into one or more hazards that includes corrosives, flammable, reactives, and toxic chemicals. As a general rule, may not be disposed of rising down the drain. Several classes of chemicals may not stored in the same containers. They should be managed by using following guidelines: recycle off-site, treat waste to reduce volume or toxicity, dispose waste in the environment or the landfill, reduce waste production at the source, example conducting smaller scale experiment. We have discussed chemical waste and its types in details, and then we will discuss about first aid practices and waste management process. Let's start. First aid practices: make sure the materials placed in the municipal waste are suitable for this type of disposal. Especially, do not place any liquid in the municipal waste. Do not dispose of chemical waste, including stock container with unused product in the municipal waste. Empty or rinsed container must be free of any hazardous residue and marked be empty. All sharps must be in appropriate puncture resistance container to prevent injuries. If a material can be mistaken as a hazardous, radioactive, or biological waste but is used, it must be identified as non-hazardous. And here is some steps for the waste management process. First is the identification. Identify the chemical properties of the waste, and B is the segregation based chemical based on properties, and C is the containment, knowing the type of the container needed to store the waste, and D is the labeling the waste with essential information, and E is the storage of waste as a holding easier, and D is the and F is the waste treatment. Lastly, treating the waste to reduce the toxicity, waste disposal, vendor. And then we will discuss these process in details. Let's start. And first is the identification. First, identify the chemical properties used in order to identify the characteristics of the waste it may produce. Characteristics of the chemicals materials can be obtained from safety data sheet, SDS sheet. This is to ensure that the chemicals or its waste characteristics are communicated effectively for safe disposal. And the second type of waste management process is the segregation. Proper segregation is equals to the good chemical hygiene plus safety warning and notice. We do not mix solid into the liquid, halogenated compounds into the non-halogenated compounds, and organic compounds into the non-organic compounds. Incompatible chemicals should be stored in separate container placed in different rooms to avoid disaster leakage. Here is the flow sheet diagrams of segregation, that we do not mix solid into the liquids and halogenated into the non-halogenated compounds, and we do not store acids and bases, strong oxidizer and organic compounds, powders or reactive metals and combustion materials, water reactive chemicals and waters or other chemicals. Here is the compatibility charts for chemical waste storage. First step is to identify the type class of the first chemical waste for disposal, and the second is identify the properties of the second chemical waste for storage, and third is look for the intercepting point between the chemical waste properties, and fourth is the refer to the legend and store chemicals accordingly. Mixing of compatible chemicals may result in explosion, releasing of harmful gases, or ion of waste container, releasing of excessive heat from experiment in thermal reaction, and then is the ignition fire. For example, mixing of incompatible chemicals may result in ignition fire such as nitrogen gas. And third is the containment. Container used to hold the waste must be incompatible, non-reactive study and leak proof. That is, primary container filled 3/4 full seal tightly, no parafilms, and second container able to hold the 1/10% of the volumes of the primary container. And fourth is the labeling. Attach the chemical waste label directly to the waste container. Chemical waste labels are available free of charge from each EHS staff. Chemical generic names of the chemicals must be listed. Storage. Waste chemicals should be stored in the chemical waste holding facility of the building. Waste should be segregated according to the compatibility groups such as acids, bases, flammable oxidizers and water reactives are not according to the alphabetical orders. And the last is the waste treatment, and how when these chemical waste after the chemical waste disposal procedure. Here some examples. It can put into the same container or bottle for waste disposal. Example, inorganic solvents, sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide and ammonia NH3. And last is the chemical waste management waste category, and examples of the compatibility can put in the some waste container bottle for disposal. First is the flammable solvents, that includes acetone, methanol, ethanol, toluene, CS3 and xylene. Xylene is in the meta, para or ortho position of benzene, where we attach CS3 in meta, para and ortho position, and acetonitrile ejector. Halogenated methylene chloride, haloethane in chloroform, carbon tetrachloride, trichloroethane, trichloroethylene. And organic solvents includes formic acid, acetic acid and propanoic acid. Waste category में examples of incompatibility cannot put in the same container bottle for disposals, requires separate container for each chemical. And mineral acids includes HCl, nitric acid, sulfuric acid and perchloric acid. And oxidizers includes potassium nitrate, potassium permanganate, reactive waste phosphorus pentoxide, sodium hydroxide, sodium methoxide, dipicric acid.